The day Diane walked out of my life, it wasn't raining, but it felt like a storm had torn through my chest. She didn't even pack much, just a small suitcase, her pride, and the last pieces of my heart. I stood by the door, staring at the place where she once smiled at me like I was her whole world. Now, I was just a man too poor to keep her dreams alive. She didn't say much, just a cold glance over her shoulder and a final line that buried itself deep in my bones. Clark, I can't live on love and promises anymore. Her words stung because they were true, at least back then. My wallet was empty, my dreams were too big for my hands to carry, and every promise I made sounded like a broken record. Diane was the kind of woman who wanted the world served to her on a silver platter, and I was offering rusty dreams wrapped in unpaid bills. She left without looking back, as if I was a chapter she regretted writing. I watched the taxi drive away, my fists clenched by my sides. It wasn't just the heartbreak, it was the humiliation. I had introduced her to my friends, to my small circle of hope, to my only family, my sister Jenny, who had always believed in me even when I doubted myself. Jenny hated seeing Diane treat me like a stepping stone, but she never said a word until Diane was gone. "You're better off without her," Jenny said softly, her voice trembling with both pity and anger. "A woman who leaves you at your lowest never deserved to rise with you." But I couldn't swallow that truth yet. My heart was still chasing shadows of Diane's laughter, still clinging to the hope that maybe she'd come back. Days turned into weeks, and my loneliness dug deeper roots. Bills piled up, the eviction notice slapped onto my door like a final insult. I almost broke, almost surrendered to the bitter taste of failure. That was when Syme entered my life like an unexpected gust of wind. He was rough around the edges, a man who had seen too much of life's cruelty to pretend otherwise. But there was fire in his eyes, the kind of fire that recognized my silent screams for help. We met at a beaten-down garage where I worked part-time, fixing engines for pennies. He saw me hunched over a busted carburetor and said, "You've got the hands of a man who could build empires, not fix scrap." I almost laughed at him. Almost. "What empire?" I replied bitterly, wiping grease off my palms. "I can't even build a decent life." But Syme didn't flinch. He crouched beside me, his eyes sharp as blades. "Then let's build one from scratch," he said, like it was the simplest thing in the world. "You've hit rock bottom. There's no place lower to go, only up." His words lit something inside me, a spark I thought Diane had taken with her when she left. For the first time in months, I felt my pulse quicken with something other than despair. Maybe Syme saw the hunger in my eyes, or maybe he just knew the taste of rock bottom too well. Either way, that day marked the beginning of something I couldn't yet understand. Jenny, always my quiet shadow, stood by me through every sleepless night. She fed me when I forgot to eat, believed in me when I doubted every step. She even took a night job cleaning offices just so I could have one less burden on my back. Her sacrifice burned in my chest, fueling my desire to rise, not just for myself, but for the sister who never gave up on me. And Diane. Oh, Diane. While I scraped the dirt for crumbs, she was living in polished apartments, clinking glasses with men who could afford her taste for luxury. Word reached me through old friends who no longer returned my calls. She had found another man, wealthier, older, who could promise her the world. But promises, I had learned, were easy to make and easier to break. I lay awake at night, eyes fixed. On the ceiling, my mind spinning with a single thought. She left me poor, but I would build an empire. And when I did, I would make her regret every choice she made. I didn't know how, I didn't have a plan, but I had something far more powerful than riches. I had rage burning in my veins and a hunger too savage to be silenced. The nights were the hardest. Hunger gnawed at my stomach, but it wasn't the kind of hunger food could fix. It was the hunger to prove I was more than just a man left behind. While Diane slept on silk sheets beside her new lover, I slept on the cold floor of a crumbling room, staring at cracked walls like they held the map to my future. Every sound in the dark reminded me I was still trapped in the life she thought I'd never escape, Saim became my anchor. He had ideas, wild ones, but he believed in them the way a drowning man believes in a floating plank. He pulled me into risky ventures, small at first, buying broken machines from junkyards and fixing them up to sell. He taught me how to bargain, like a street hawk, how to see value in what others saw as trash. Together, we hustled day and night, turning pennies into dollars. Jenny managed our scraps like a queen without a crown. She kept our tiny operation running, managing accounts in an old ledger she had found in the trash. Her handwriting, once elegant and practiced for school, now filled the pages with numbers and debts. She never complained. She just looked at me with tired eyes that held oceans of quiet hope. "You were made for more than this, Clark," she told me one night, her voice thick with exhaustion but firm with belief. "Don't stop now." And I didn't. I couldn't. Saim found us better deals, and I learned to see opportunities even in the filthiest corners of the city. We moved fast, reinvesting every single cent. We sold repaired generators to street vendors who had no power, fixed engines for desperate delivery men who couldn't afford new bikes, even built water pumps for villages outside the city limits. Our name started to spread in whispers, not yet loud, but steady. People called us the men who turn rust into gold, but gold, I soon learned, attracts shadows. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, a man in an expensive suit visited our makeshift workshop. His name was Victor Hale, a ruthless businessman who had built his fortune on the bones of men like me. He eyed our progress with a predator's smile, circling our machines like he was already tasting our success. "You're making waves, Clark," Victor said smoothly, lighting a cigar with fingers heavy in gold rings. "Careful, or you'll drown in them." I met his gaze, refusing to flinch. "I'd rather drown in waves than rot in the dirt." He chuckled, a sound that carried both amusement and threat. "Ambition is good," he replied, exhaling smoke into the air. "But remember, the ocean swallows men like you whole." His warning lingered long after he left, but instead of fear, it sparked something wild in me. If men like Victor were starting to notice, then I was finally on the right path. Then, as fate would have it, I saw her. Diane. She stepped out of a glossy black car, dressed in a blood-red dress that clung to her like temptation itself. She was laughing, her hand wrapped around the arm of her wealthy new man. For a brief second, our eyes met across the crowded street. Time slowed, and my chest tightened. Not with love, no, that had died long ago. It was something colder, sharper. Recognition flickered in her gaze, followed by something else. Was it surprise? Maybe even regret? She quickly looked away, dismissing me like a bad memory. But I saw it. That crack in her perfect facade. She thought she had buried me under the weight of her abandonment, thought I'd stay broken forever. But I was rising, piece by piece, brick by bloody brick. And when I built my empire, she wouldn't. Just see me. She'd choke on the sight of everything she had walked away from. "Watch me," I whispered to myself, my fists tightening at my sides. "Watch me burn the whole world down just to build my own." And so, I worked harder, slept less, pushed every boundary. My hands bled from labor, my back ached from long days and longer nights, but none of it mattered. Saim kept finding doors, and I kept kicking them open. Jenny kept the books alive, breathing life into every number like she was weaving our future with threads of survival. We were still far from an empire, but for the first time, I could see the shape of it forming on the horizon. And Diane. She was going to see it too. Every painful step of the way. The days that followed the gala felt like fuel poured straight onto my fire. I could still see Diane's face in my mind, that flicker of surprise turning into something bitter, something sharp. Regret, maybe. Or fear. Either way, it fed me. Saim, always quick to seize an opportunity, saw my rising hunger and pushed me harder. "Now is the time, Clark," he said, his voice fierce with certainty. "While they're watching, we strike. We don't just grow, we conquer." I nodded because there was no turning back. I had tasted the power of rising from nothing, and I wanted more. We started acquiring small competitors, businesses too weak to survive, but just valuable enough to be pieces in our growing empire. We didn't just offer them buyouts, we offered survival, and desperate men will sell you their soul if you promise them tomorrow. Jenny worked tirelessly, barely sleeping, her sharp mind keeping us 2 steps ahead. I'd never seen her so alive, so ruthless. She negotiated like a queen who knew her kingdom was expanding by the hour. There were moments late at night when I'd catch her staring at the ledgers, her lips curved in a small, dangerous smile. "I used to dream about being a teacher," she confessed to me once, running her fingers over the profit sheets. "But this feels like I'm writing history with every stroke of my pen." And she was. We all were. Our names spread through the city like wildfire. Invitations arrived daily, business meetings, luncheons, private deals behind closed doors. People who once dismissed me now begged for a seat at my table. Investors who once laughed at our ragtag operation now watched us with envy, their own empires trembling under the weight of our rise. But through it all, Diane remained in my thoughts. Like a thorn lodged deep in my skin, she kept reminding me of why I started this path in the first place. And then, fate handed me a weapon I couldn't have planned better myself. Word reached me that Diane's wealthy lover, the man who had plucked her from my broken life, was in trouble. His empire, it turned out, was built on shaky ground, risky loans, debts hidden beneath layers of false success. And as luck would have it, many of those debts were tied to the very businesses I was now acquiring. Syme saw it before I did. He burst into my office one evening, his eyes alight with a dangerous thrill. "Clark," he said, tossing a file onto my desk. "He's weak, vulnerable. If we play this right, we don't just win, we take everything, including her." I opened the file and saw the numbers, the signatures, the desperate deals made by a man too arrogant to see his own collapse. My chest tightened, a storm brewing beneath my ribs. This was it. My chance to not just rise, but to crush. Jenny stood beside me, her eyes scanning the documents with quiet calculation. "He won't survive the quarter," she said softly, "and when he falls, she falls with him." I swallowed hard, feeling a mix of satisfaction and something darker twisting inside me. "Good," I replied. "Let her feel what it's like to be left behind." The days moved swiftly after that. We tightened our grip, squeezed every weakness, forced early repayments, pulled support from his ventures until they cracked like dry earth. His downfall wasn't loud or dramatic. It was slow, suffocating, a silent strangulation. And Diane? She watched it happen, helpless. The luxury crumbled beneath her feet, the comfortable life she had chosen slipping through her fingers like sand. I imagined her waking up to arguments over money, seeing eviction notices, watching her world collapse in slow motion. I didn't need revenge to be fast. I wanted it to be thorough. One evening, I stood at my office window, looking out over the city that once saw me as nothing. The streets below pulsed with life, and my empire stretched far beyond what my eyes could see. Syme entered quietly, holding a single envelope. "The final deal is closed," he said. "We own everything." I took the envelope, feeling the weight of my victory settle into my bones. "And her?" I asked, my voice steady but cold. "Ruined," Syme replied without hesitation. "She has nothing left." I let out a slow breath, my gaze never leaving the skyline. Diane had left me poor, discarded me like trash, but now she would see that I had built something far greater than anything she had ever dreamed of, and she would live every day knowing that her choice had led her straight into ruin. The day our paths crossed again was not by accident. I made sure of it. For weeks I had waited, letting the collapse of her world run its course. I didn't want to see Diane while she still had hope in her eyes. No, I wanted to see her when that last ember of pride had turned to ash. I wanted to look her in the eyes and see the reflection of every sleepless night I had endured because of her. It happened at an auction house downtown. One of her last lifelines, a desperate attempt to salvage what little dignity she had left. Her lover's assets were being liquidated, one by one. Cars, jewelry, property. They were parading their former life before vultures like me, ready to pick the bones clean. I arrived early, took a seat at the front, and waited. The crowd buzzed, with quiet greed, eyes shining at the thought of bargains snatched from someone else's misery. And then, there she was. Diane entered with her head held high, too high for a woman whose world was in ruins. But I saw through the mask. Her dress, though still elegant, no longer looked new. Her posture, though proud, couldn't hide the thin desperation in her frame. She scanned the room, and when her eyes landed on me, her breath caught. For a heartbeat, the world around us faded. It was just her and me, caught in the aftermath of all the choices we had made. I didn't look away. I wanted her to see me, to feel the weight of my gaze like a chain around her neck. Her lips parted, as if she might speak, but no words came. What could she possibly say? Sorry? Regret dripped from her eyes like poison, but it was too late for apologies. As the auctioneer's voice echoed through the room, I raised my hand for the first item, a diamond necklace I recognized immediately. I had seen it once on Diane's neck, glistening against her skin at a party she had never invited me to. Now, it was just another trophy. Sold, the auctioneer announced, his gavel slamming down. I caught her flinch, saw the tiny tremor in her hands as she clasped them tightly together. I bought everything, every last item that once defined her life of luxury. Not because I needed it, but because I could. By the end of the auction, the weight of my silent revenge hung heavy in the air. The crowd whispered, stealing glances between Diane and me, sensing the invisible war unfolding before them. When it was over, as the vultures dispersed with their winnings, I approached her slowly. She stood frozen, as if her legs might buckle beneath her. Her eyes, once filled with fire and ambition, now shimmered with unshed tears. "Clark," she finally said, her voice cracking around my name like it was made of glass. I stopped in front of her, close enough to see the raw regret bleeding through her composure. "You look surprised to see me," I said quietly, my tone sharper than any knife. She swallowed hard, her gaze flickering to the empty display cases that once held her treasures. "I never thought," she began, but her voice faltered. "You never thought I'd survive," I finished for her. "You thought you left me in the gutter to rot, but instead, you made me hungrier than you could ever imagine." Her lips trembled. "Clark, Save it," I cut her off, my eyes hard and unyielding. "No words can fill the hole you carved into my life. No apologies will erase the nights I spent with nothing but my rage to keep me warm." Tears finally slipped down her cheeks, and for a moment, I almost felt something like pity. But it was fleeting, crushed beneath the weight of everything she had done. "You left me poor," I said, my voice low but filled with all the fury and triumph I had carried for years. "But I built an empire, and now you can stand there and drown in the ruins of your own greed." She tried to speak again, but her words were choked by the sob rising in her throat. Without another glance, I turned and walked away, leaving her behind just as she had once done to me. But this time I carried not the weight of loss, but the victory of a man who had risen from the ashes. I thought that would be the end of it. Thought that walking away from Diane in that auction hall, leaving her shattered beneath, the weight of her own regret, would close the final chapter between us. But I was wrong. People like Diane don't fade away quietly. They cling to whatever scraps of power they have left, clawing at memories, at ghosts, hoping to pull themselves back into relevance. It wasn't long before she came looking for me. First, it was small things. Messages left unanswered, calls I refused to return, then letters. Handwritten, trembling words from the woman who once walked out of my life without a second glance. Letters that smelled of desperation, not perfume. I never opened them. I didn't need to. I already knew what they would say. Regret is a predictable language. But then she did something I didn't expect. She showed up at my office. Jenny warned me before she even stepped through the door. "She's here," Jenny said, her voice cold and steady. "Should I send her away?" I looked up from my desk, pausing just a moment before I answered. "No," I said finally. "Let her in. Let's hear the words she's been dying to say." When Diane entered, she was a shadow of the woman I once loved. Her eyes, once sharp and full of ambition, were dim with sleepless nights and unspoken fears. She stood before me, clutching her purse like it was her last possession in the world. "Clark," she began, her voice soft, almost a whisper. I had no one else to turn to. Her honesty startled me more than any insult or excuse could have. For the first time, she didn't hide behind pride. She didn't mask her desperation. She stood there stripped of all her illusions, and it hit me harder than I expected. But I didn't let it show. "You made your choice," I replied evenly. "And now you're living with it." Her eyes glistened with tears. She tried to blink away. "I was wrong," she admitted, the words dragging out of her like broken glass. "I thought I needed more than love. I thought I needed comfort, wealth, safety." She swallowed hard. "But none of it mattered. None of it lasted." "And now you want what?" I asked, my tone sharp. "Forgiveness? Pity?" "No," she said quickly, shaking her head. "No, I just want to understand how you did it, how you rose from nothing, how you became everything they said you never could." There it was. The raw truth. Not love, not reconciliation. She came looking for the secret to survival. I leaned back in my chair, my gaze never leaving hers. "I did it," I said slowly, "because you left me no other choice." Her breath caught in her throat. "You left me in ruins, Diane. And when a man has nothing left, not even his pride, he has two options: die beneath the weight or rebuild himself from the bones of his past." She took a shaky step closer, her hands trembling. "Clark, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect anything from you." Her voice cracked like ice under pressure. "But please, let me be part of what you've built. Let me help you now, even if it's just a fraction of what I once destroyed." For a moment, I said nothing. Her offer dangled in the air between us, fragile and desperate. Jenny, standing in the corner, crossed her arms, her eyes narrowed with quiet fury. Saeem, who had entered silently, watched the scene unfold with a sharp gaze like a lion observing wounded prey. "You think you can step back into my life," I said finally, my voice low and tight with buried rage. "After you traded me for riches and left me to rot." She flinched as if the words slapped her. "I don't want your pity, Clark," she whispered. "I just want a second chance to stand beside the man you've become." A bitter laugh escaped me, sharp and humorless. "Stand beside me? Diane, you can barely stand on your own." Her eyes brimmed over, tears sliding down her cheeks unchecked. I should have felt satisfaction watching her break, but what I felt instead was colder, emptier. I felt nothing at all. "You'll never stand beside me," I said, rising from my seat, "because you were never strong enough to walk this path with me, and you never will be." And with that, I turned away from her, feeling the weight of my final words settle into the silence she left behind. She didn't follow me. She didn't speak again. She simply stood there, frozen, as if the last spark of her hope had been snuffed out forever, and maybe it had. The days after Diane left my office were colder, quieter, but not empty. There was no satisfaction in watching her fall apart in front of me, just a hollow ache, the kind you feel after winning a battle that should have never happened in the first place. I kept telling myself this is what I wanted: to see her broken, to see her beg, to see her regret every step she took away from me. And yet, even with all that, there was no peace. Saeem, sharp-eyed as ever, sensed it before I could admit it to myself. He didn't bother with pleasantries when he entered my office late one evening, dropping a fresh stack of contracts onto my desk. His expression was hard, but his voice was laced with quiet warning. "You think she's finished, Clark?" he asked, tapping the papers. "Diane's the kind of woman who burns bridges, but she keeps the ashes close. She's not done with you. Not yet." I stared at him, saying nothing, because deep down I knew he was right. And just as if the universe had been listening, the storm came. It started with whispers in the industry. Deals we had lined up for months suddenly went cold. Meetings were canceled without explanation. Our suppliers hesitated. Our partners faltered. It didn't make sense until Jenny stormed into my office, her face pale beneath the weight of what she had discovered. "She's poisoning our name," Jenny snapped, slamming a file onto my desk. Her hands shook, not with fear, but fury. "She's using whatever scraps of influence she has left, spreading lies, turning people against us." I flipped through the documents. False claims, forged complaints, twisted truths designed to choke our empire at the roots. I felt my chest tighten, the anger boiling up my throat. Diane. She had nothing left but her spite, and she was spending it all to see me fall. Saim's jaw tightened as he read over Jenny's findings. "She's desperate," he muttered. "Cornered animal kind of desperate. She knows she can't compete with you in the open, so she's coming at you from the shadows." A bitter taste filled my mouth. I had given her nothing but silence when she begged me for a place beside me. I had shown her the door and shut it in her face. And now, this was her answer. If she couldn't rise with me, she would rather drag me back into the pit. Jenny's eyes burned with protective rage. "We can fight this," she said, her voice low but fierce. "We've survived worse." But this wasn't just about survival anymore. This was personal. Diane wanted to destroy not just my business, but my victory. She wanted to steal the very thing I built from my brokenness. "No," I said firmly, closing the file. "We don't fight this in silence." Both Jenny and Saim looked at me waiting. I stood, my decision clear, carved into my bones like a vow. "We go public," I continued. "We expose every lie, every piece of rot she spread in the shadows. We bring light to every dark corner she's hiding in." Saim grinned, a sharp, dangerous grin that promised no mercy. "Now you're speaking my language." Jenny nodded too, her hands steady now, her eyes fierce, with purpose. "I'll make sure the truth cuts deeper than her lies ever could." We moved fast, relentless. Press conferences, public statements, proof of every forged claim. We unleashed a wave of truth so brutal that it drowned every whisper Diane had dared to speak against us. Partners who had hesitated came crawling back. Investors who had doubted us doubled their stakes. But the final blow came when Saim uncovered something deeper, an old financial scandal from Diane's lover, something she had buried and hoped would never surface. We handed it to the authorities, and like wolves tasting blood, they descended without mercy. Diane's fall was no longer quiet. It was public, humiliating. I watched it unfold, not with joy, but with cold finality. On television screens, in newspapers, online headlines. Her name, once dripping with luxury, now soaked in scandal. The woman who left me for wealth had now lost everything. Not just her riches, not just her reputation, but her place in a world she once thought belonged to her. And as I stood in my office looking out over the city I now ruled, I felt it settle deep in my chest, the final, undeniable truth. She had left me poor, but I had built an empire, and she would regret it for the rest of her life. It should have felt like victory. Everything I had dreamed of, everything I had clawed and bled for, was finally mine. The city that once ignored me now whispered my name with reverence and fear. My empire stood tall, unshakable. Contracts filled my desk like trophies. I had money, power, respect, the very things Diane once abandoned me to chase. But as I stared out from my office window, watching the city lights flicker like stars at my feet. There was a hollowness in my chest that no amount of wealth could fill. Revenge had been a fire that kept me alive through the coldest nights. But now, the flames had cooled to ashes, and all that remained was smoke in my lungs. Syme, ever loyal, knocked on the door and stepped inside. He wore success as easily as he wore his sharp suits now, but there was something thoughtful in his gaze tonight. "It's done," he said simply. I nodded. "She's finished," he added, though he didn't have to. We both knew Diane's world had burned down completely, her accounts frozen, her name in ruins. She was being dragged through courtrooms, headlines and scandal after scandal. I should have felt something like triumph. But instead, I felt a quiet emptiness crawling through my veins. Jenny joined us a moment later, her usual fire tempered by a strange, soft sadness. She had fought beside me every step of the way, but she too must have felt the weight of what we had done. "She called," Jenny said quietly. I turned to her, my jaw tightening. What did she want? Jenny's eyes, sharp and knowing, softened for the briefest moment. She didn't ask for money, not help. She just wanted to talk. To you. Silence stretched between us, thick as a storm. Syme's voice broke it. "If you see her now, it's not mercy she's asking for, Clark. She's already drowning. She just wants you to watch her sink." Maybe he was right. Maybe Diane didn't want saving. Maybe she wanted one final act in the play we had written together, a cruel ending to a story soaked in betrayal and vengeance. And yet, something in me couldn't leave it unfinished. Not like this. Hours later, I found her where I knew she would be. Not in the shadows of courtrooms or in the ruins of luxury apartments, but at the place where it had all begun. A small, forgotten park where we used to dream beneath the stars, back when all we had was hope and foolish promises. She sat alone on a weathered bench, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes distant and hollow. She didn't hear me approach, but when I stood before her, she looked up. Time had not been kind to her. The glow she once carried had faded, replaced by the harsh lines of regret. Her eyes, though dulled by pain, still held a glimmer of the woman I had once loved. "Clark," she whispered, her voice thin and brittle. "I thought you wouldn't come." I studied her for a long moment, feeling a storm of old memories churn in my chest. "I almost didn't," I admitted. Silence hung between us, heavy with everything that had been said and left unsaid. "I didn't come to beg," she said softly, her eyes not leaving mine. "I know there's no forgiveness for what I did. I just needed to see you, like this, to see what I lost with my own foolish hands." There was no performance in her words, no mask of pride left to wear. She was stripped bare, raw and real. "You didn't just lose me," I said quietly. "You lost yourself." A tear slipped down her cheek, but she didn't wipe it away. "I thought I wanted everything," she confessed, her voice shaking. "Wealth, comfort, security. But in the end, I traded my soul for emptiness." Her honesty pierced deeper than any of her betrayals ever had. For a fleeting moment, I saw the woman she might have been if greed hadn't devoured her heart. I saw the love we could have built, the empire we might have ruled together. But that version of our story belonged to a past that no longer existed. "You taught me something, Diane," I said at last, my voice steady but heavy with finality. "You taught me that loss can build a man stronger than love ever could. And for that, I don't hate you, but I'll never pity you either." Her lips trembled as she tried to hold back another tear, but it escaped anyway. She nodded slowly, as if my words were both the blade and the closure she had been waiting for. I turned to leave, feeling the weight of her gaze cling to my back. She didn't call after me. She didn't beg for a second chance. She simply watched me walk away, her silent tears marking the true end of us. As I stepped back into the life I had built with my own bloody hands, I felt the final piece of my past loosen and fall away. I had conquered the ruins she left me in. I had built an empire from my heartbreak, from my rage, from my pain. And now, I walked forward, not for revenge, not for her regret, but for myself, for the man I had become, for the empire that would never fall.